It was the summer of 2014 when my friends and I decided to go camping deep in the Appalachian Mountains. We'd always wanted to experience the wilderness, get away from the city for a weekend. So we packed up our gear, drove several hours to a secluded campsite, and set up under the thick canopy of trees. The air was crisp and cool, the kind that made you feel alive, like you were surrounded by untouched nature. But even then, something felt different. The first night, everything went as planned. We built a campfire, roasted marshmallows, told jokes and shared stories. But it wasn't until the fire started to die down that the atmosphere shifted. That's when my friend Sarah, who had been quiet all night, spoke up. "You guys ever hear the stories about these woods?" she asked, her voice low and careful, like she was about to share something important. We all nodded, eager to hear what she had to say. "People say these trees," she gestured vaguely toward the towering trunks surrounding us, "have voices, that they whisper to those who listen closely enough." We all laughed. "Come on, Sarah, not this again," Jake teased, but she wasn't laughing. Her face had gone pale, eyes wide. "No, seriously," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "The locals back in the town where I'm from say that if you stay in these woods long enough, you start hearing things. Whispers. Even if no one's around, and they're not just random sounds, they're words." We all went quiet at that. There's something about stories like that, something about the woods and the dark and the firelight, that made you feel uneasy. But we brushed it off. Sarah had always been the superstitious one. Still, as the night wore on, we all found ourselves glancing nervously at the trees, feeling the weight of the silence that seemed to press down on us more and more as the fire burned low. The next day we hiked deeper into the forest, taking in the beauty around us. The trail twisted and turned through thick underbrush, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in dappled patterns. But as we walked, I began to notice something strange. It was subtle at first, a rustling in the trees, a slight shift in the air, like someone was walking just behind us. I'd turn around expecting to see one of my friends, but no one was there. By the time we set up camp again, deep in the woods, I felt off. It was quiet, too quiet, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. We sat down around the campfire, the flickering flames casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally long. And then we heard it, a soft whisper, just beyond the edge of the firelight. At first it was too faint to understand, but then it came again, clearer this time. "Go back." It was a voice, but not like any voice I'd heard before. It wasn't human, not exactly. It was low, raspy, like the wind itself had taken on a voice. I froze, staring into the darkness, my heart racing. My friends heard it too. I could see their faces as they looked around, unsure where the voice had come from. Sarah was the first to speak. "I told you," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "The trees." We all sat there in stunned silence. The whispering seemed to grow louder, now a chorus of hushed voices, speaking in a language none of us could understand. It sounded like the trees themselves were trying to communicate with us. Without thinking, we grabbed our things and ran. We didn't even pack up the campfire. We just ran, the sounds of whispers following us, trailing through the trees. I don't know how long we ran, but when we finally stopped, we were miles away from our original camp, panting and terrified. We had no idea where we were. That night, we slept in the car, too afraid to return to the woods. But as we sat in silence, staring into the dark forest, the whispers continued. They were faint but unmistakable. We never spoke of it again, and we never went back to those woods. But to this day, I hear those whispers in my dreams, and I wonder if the trees are still calling for us. In the fall of 2016, a group of friends and I decided to escape the hustle of everyday life for a weekend getaway. We rented a small, secluded cabin in the woods. It was a rustic place, nothing luxurious, just a simple wooden structure tucked deep into the forest. The kind of cabin you only find after an hour or two of winding through narrow dirt roads that seem to go on forever. The first evening was peaceful. We drank, played cards, and shared stories around the campfire. It was one of those nights where everything felt calm, too calm. The stillness of the woods, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire or the rustle of leaves in the wind, was oddly comforting. But there was something about the cabin that felt off. It wasn't the kind of feeling you could point to, just a general unease that seemed to settle in your bones as the sun dipped below the horizon. We went to bed that night, each of us in our own rooms, each of us trying to ignore the nagging, feeling that there was something wrong with the place. I fell asleep quickly, my exhaustion from the long drive finally catching up to me, but at around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. The room was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the moonlight, filtering through the window. For a moment I just lay there trying to shake the grogginess from my mind, but then I noticed it. A figure standing just inside the doorway. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. The figure was tall, thin, and seemed to be wearing a dark hood. It was motionless, just standing there, staring into the room. My heart began to race. I reached for my phone, but the glow from the screen seemed to make the figure stand out even more. I froze, unable to look away. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure was gone. I sat up in bed, my pulse pounding in my ears, but the room was empty. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a product of the darkness and the eerie stillness of the night. The next morning, I told the others about what I had seen. They laughed it off, dismissing it as nothing more than a shadow, the kind that forms when the moonlight hits just right. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that place. The cabin felt wrong. It was as if the walls themselves were hiding something, a secret that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Later that day we went hiking, trying to clear our minds. The fresh air and the sound of birds chirping did wonders for our spirits, but when we returned to the cabin, the sense of unease crept back in. The door to the cabin was slightly ajar, even though we had locked it before leaving. I felt a chill run down my spine. We all shrugged it off, assuming the wind had pushed it open. But the moment we stepped inside, we noticed something strange. The furniture in the living room had been moved, not just a little. Everything was out of place, as if someone had been inside, rummaging through the cabin. The chairs were knocked over, the rug was bunched up, and the lights were on, even though we had left them off when we left. But what unsettled me the most was the faint smell in the air, something metallic like blood but stale. We checked each room, convinced that someone had broken in while we were out, but there was no sign of forced entry. The doors and windows were all locked. It didn't make sense. As we stood in the kitchen trying to figure out what had happened, I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from upstairs. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, like something dragging across the floor. I motioned for the others to be quiet. We all stood, frozen, listening to the sound. It was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was up there. Against my better judgment, I crept up the stairs, my friends following behind me. As we reached the top, I felt the air grow colder, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. I pushed open the door to the first bedroom, but there was nothing there. We moved to the second room, and that's when I saw it. The shadow. It was standing in the corner of the room, just like the figure I had seen the night before. This time it wasn't just standing still. It was moving, pacing slowly across the room, dragging its feet along the floor. The figure's movements were jerky, like it was struggling to maintain some semblance of human form, and then, just as I was about to scream, it turned toward me. But there was no face, no features, just a mass of darkness, like the shadow itself, had taken shape. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. The others were frozen too, their eyes wide with terror. Then, with one final scrape of its feet across the floor, the shadow lunged toward us, vanishing into the air. We didn't waste any time. We grabbed our things and without a word, we fled the cabin, not stopping until we were safely in the car. We drove back to town that night, our nerves completely shot. We never spoke of the shadow again, but I know we all felt it. That same lingering presence, that something was in that cabin with us, something that wasn't human. I don't know what it was, but I've never gone back to that place, and I never will, ever will. It was a quiet, uneventful summer when my cousin and I decided to go camping in a remote part of the woods near his cabin. We had been camping there many times before, and it had always been an enjoyable experience. No issues, no strange occurrences, just nature at its best. But that weekend would change everything. We arrived in the early afternoon, setting up our tent near the edge of the forest, a spot we had picked because it was far from the main trail and felt more isolated. It was peaceful, with the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional chirp of a bird. We set up the campfire, made our sandwiches, and settled in, chatting about old memories and plans for the future. It felt like the perfect weekend, but as night fell, something strange started happening. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the atmosphere, like the air had become heavier. My cousin mentioned that he felt like we were being watched, but I brushed it off, telling him it was just the usual paranoia that comes with being in the woods at night. After all, it was pitch black, save for the flickering fire, and the forest around us was silent. Too silent. We continued talking, but then, out of nowhere, we heard it, a rustling in the bushes. It wasn't an animal. This was different. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. The leaves crackled as something or someone moved closer. We both fell silent, staring into the dark forest, waiting for whatever it was to make its move. But it didn't. The sound stopped, and then all was quiet again. We laughed nervously, thinking it was just some wild animal. But as the night wore on, the unsettling feeling grew. The air felt colder, and the fire seemed to burn lower, as if the darkness itself was consuming the light. Then, just as we were about to head into the tent for the night, we heard a voice. Faint at first, but unmistakable. "Leave." The voice was low and raspy, like a whisper carried on the wind. I turned to my cousin, but he was already staring into the trees, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Nodded, though my heart was racing. The voice had come from deeper in the forest, somewhere beyond the reach of the firelight. It sounded distant, but it was clear, and it was telling us to leave. We stood there for a long moment, unsure what to do. We had never heard anything like it before. It was too quiet now, the forest holding its breath. Then suddenly the rustling came again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving toward us, slow, deliberate, like someone was approaching on foot. We bolted for the tent, not bothering to pack anything up. The door of the tent zipped shut behind us, but even in the safety of the small nylon structure, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. We lay in silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, as if to confirm our worst fears, we heard the voice again. "Leave." This time the voice was much closer. And then, just as we were about to grab our things and run, we heard something even more horrifying, scratching at the walls of the tent. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. My cousin was holding his breath, trying not to make a sound. Whatever was out there was circling us, waiting for the right moment to strike. We could hear the scratching, like long, clawed fingers scraping along the fabric of the tent. It felt like something was trying to get in. We didn't move, barely, daring to breathe. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The forest was silent again. The air grew thick with tension. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we decided to make a break for it. We threw open the tent door and sprinted into the night, not looking back until we reached the cabin. We didn't stop running until we were inside, locked behind the heavy doors. But even then, we couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us. The unease lingered long after we had settled into the safety of the cabin. We tried to rationalize it, but it didn't make sense. There was no one else in the forest, no other campers for miles, no animals, nothing. Just us and whatever it was that had been watching us. The next morning, we packed up our things and left the woods without a word. We didn't want to stay another night. As we drove away, we passed by the campsite where we had stayed, and that's when we saw it. Tree just beyond the edge of the clearing, its bark scratched and marred as if something had clawed at it. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was a person or something else entirely, but I do know this. The woods are not always as empty as they seem, and some places, no matter how beautiful, are cursed. I don't know why we were targeted, or what would have happened if we had stayed another night. But the memory of that voice, of the scratching at the tent, still haunts me to this day, and I've never gone back to that forest, not even for a second.